Hello and welcome to another episode of The Flying Reporter. This video is made in association with Astral Aviation Consulting, who in turn are working with the UK CAA to disseminate advice and information to help us all fly more safely. In general aviation, most accidents or serious incidents occur within the vicinity of an aerodrome. And so today we're going to take a deep dive into arrival and departure procedures to see what you can do to improve the safety of your flights. Most of the flying mistakes I've made in the past have happened either shortly after takeoff or on approach to landing. Whether it's forgetting to retract my flaps, getting confused which way I'm going in the circuit, or even coming close to busting airspace. I've shared many of my errors here on YouTube, but today it's time for us to hear some of yours. It's pilot confession time. I'm with instructor and examiner Nigel Wilson, and together we're going to hear about some of your mistakes. A few weeks ago I asked you to send in your confessions of your most embarrassing, silly or downright dangerous cock-ups that you've made whilst either arriving or departing an aerodrome. Let's hear some of them.
Forgive me, flying reporter, for I have sinned. Once when departing Exeter Airport to fly home towards the east, I was using the airways reporting points as references in the G1000. My first reporting point was Gibso, which is near Bournemouth. When I took off from Exeter and put the autopilot on, the aircraft then proceeded to go west. What I didn't realise is that there is also a Gibso in Albuquerque in the US, which is where the aircraft is heading for. Obviously not enough attention spent with the flight planning.
You know, I'm guilty. I throw them in the flight plan.
Yeah, it's so easily done.
Hello John, this is Mark, the Bristol flyer. Whilst doing my training, I was flying a Cessna 152. I'd done all my power-up checks. The plane in front of me then departed, but before I finished all my final checks, I moved up to the line to make space and then carried on and got departure clearance, departed without doing any of my final checks. I realised this whilst I come back in, my transponder was still on standby instead of on all.
I took off completely out of trim. After landing safely, I conducted a mental debrief and concluded that during the pre-flight I had committed it to memory. So first lesson there, don't commit checks to memory.
I've missed checklists. I think I thought I've done them, and somehow sometimes I don't even know why I've missed it.
No, that's right, and it's very easy to do when you get familiar with the checklist. So you might think you're following it, but actually you're not.
I was visiting Enstone Airfield, a new airfield for me. When it was time to get back home, I got into my aircraft, started the engine, called up the radio room, and they passed me the airfield details and asked me whether I would be ready for an immediate takeoff, which I said I was. And since I was parked at the right hand of the runway, right next to the runway, all I had to do was do a 90-degree turn onto the runway and I could take straight off. Only then did I realize that I'd forgotten both my power checks as well as my pre-takeoff checks. I don't think it was time pressure as such. I can't remember being under time pressure, but it was certainly the lack of just a routine at a new airfield.
Yeah, new airfield, and also being hurried along maybe a little bit, or maybe a bit of a distraction.
Yeah. ATC have got very good suggestive powers.
Hi John, I'm Douglas, I'm from London and I fly from Elstree. The confession I have to make is that I forgot to bring my checklist to the airfield, which then meant that I forgot to turn the alternator on. I only realised this once I was at cruising altitude and there was a low voltage light.
So here is my confession. On my qualifying cross-country flight, last leg, I took off in a PA-28 from Compton Abbas, climbed out to about 1,500 feet, and there was a pop and the top catch of the door came undone. So I had a very noisy last leg of the flight back to Eagle Scott. Try as I might, I could not reach to close the catch. Cause, well, all I can think is that though I went through the checks very carefully, I was perhaps saying some of them rather than actually physically checking.
Maybe, although some of those doors are quite difficult sometimes. They don't always close.
They don't,
tight.
no, that's
and
right.
This hasn't happened to me. I bet it's happened to you though once or twice, is it?
A couple of times it's happened to me, yeah. It's most disconcerting when you're over water, actually.
Hello, my name's Oliver and I'm currently doing my PPL down in Compton Abbas in Dorset. My confession is I didn't check the hatches and doors properly on the pre-departure checklist. My instructor often has the door unlatched on hot days to cool himself down a bit, and on the crosswind leg we discovered that it literally wasn't closed.
I'm Peter and I fly around London. I was taking my girlfriend and my sister to see Dover Cliffs. As I'm calling out airspeed live during takeoff, I hear my girlfriend screaming, so I abort, exit the runway and report it on the radio. I had forgotten to close the cargo door and I littered the whole runway with clothes, stuff from my flight bag and sandwiches. I halted all departures and arrivals for 15 minutes, but the birds loved the sandwiches. Lesson learned, posing for photos will distract you.
Okay.
So he puts it down to photos.
Yeah,
so,
distractions again, yeah.
And actually that cargo door, that's really interesting because if you think about the amount of times you come in and out of that door when you're pre-flighting, loading, getting things out.
You do.
It's very easy.
Yeah.
I mean, I always make a habit of closing it every time. But
I make a habit of closing it and locking it, actually, before I fly, just as another mechanism. But better that it happened on the ground rather than in flight, and the debris, shall we say, sandwiches hitting elevators or stabilators and things like that in the air, so yeah.
They were great, weren't they? I thought, I mean, and so refreshing to hear such honesty and candour here.
Absolutely. I think the important thing to realise is that, we won't individually as pilots have time to make all of the mistakes ourselves, so it's really, really vital that you learn from other people's mistakes.
Thank you so much to all of you who submitted your confessions.
We'll hear some more of your confessions later.
So what can you do to prevent yourself from making mistakes like the ones we've just heard about there? We're going to go on a training flight now. Nigel's going to be my instructor, I will be the student, and we're going to do a land away. And when we do so, Nigel will be sharing his tips for safe departures and arrivals.
Okay, John, so tip number one is don't forget we have to do some performance calculations, okay, for the departure. It's a legal requirement to do so, and if there was an incident, you'd be expected to be able to reproduce that calculation that you've done for that day.
You should have it to hand. You should.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I did my performance calculations before coming out to the aeroplane, so I know we're good for our departure and also where we're heading to today.
We could taxi with the door open. Why did we remember to sort it up again?
I made the required radio call and then started my taxi.
I'm good. Just watch my wing there. There's loads of room there if you turn left here.
So one thing for our next tip I wanted to ask you about was whether there's a point upon the runway that we decide we're going to abort the takeoff. And not all runways are kind of cleverly marked or have things that you can choose. What's your rule for deciding whether there's a point on the runway?
Well, there's various rules of thumb that you can apply, but they really are rules of thumb, and nothing beats actually doing both parts of the performance calculation to work out not only your distance to 50 feet, the takeoff distance required, but also what the ground run requires is going to be for the given conditions on the day. And then you need to translate that, of course, to a place on the ground, so that you need to be airborne by. So, as you say, not many airfields have got nicely laid out markings, but you might be able to, for example, count runway lights when you know how many runway lights there are down a runway, and work out roughly how far down that runway by how many lights you pass when you should be airborne by. And if you're not, come to a stop and don't continue.
Right, power checks then. Let's go to our checklist. Parking brake is set, fuel selector set fullest tank. And that's a tip worth noting, isn't it?
It is. So, irrespective of what you think you've done to start with, if your checklist doesn't say to start the aeroplane on the lease tank, You really do want to change tanks to the fullest tank, and irrespective, you do need to change tanks to do this check. We want to make sure the fuel flows from both the tanks before we get airborne.
Yeah. Alternator is on. I'm doing this really carefully now after listening to all those other people that...
And I'm not interrupting you.
Magnetos on both. T's and P's are all green. Doors. We'll close the door then, please. Make sure that's fully closed.
And it is really shut.
Landing light, transponder, pitot heat, parking brake. We're ready to go. Time for another tip. We need to know what we're going to do if something goes wrong.
You are.
And that could be called the captain's brief, or sometimes called the emergency brief. I've heard it called both.
Basically, the important thing is this is a brief for yourself. It's not for your passengers.
So you can do it even if you've got passengers.
You
don't have
passengers.
passengers.
Yeah, even without passengers, it's just as important to do it. So basically, you're going to bring to the forefront of your mind all of the key pieces of information that you might need to make use of in the next minute or so.
Yeah. So we're going to take runway 06. It's a right-hand circuit if we have to return back. You are in command, but I will fly the aeroplane unless you take control from me. We're going to speeds, just checking our speeds for this rotation. It's 61 with 2 stages of flap for rotation. If we're on the runway and we've got a problem, we will close the throttle, apply the brakes and stop. If we've taken off and there's runway remaining, we will close the throttle. We will select the glide of 96 by pushing forward and land back. If we've taken off and there isn't any runway remaining, we will close the throttle, push forward. 96 is the glide, and we will look for a field left or right. Any questions?
That's it. So the speeds,
is that pretty much
the speeds are key.
Yeah.
They're a key part of that. That's right.
And pushing forward. I usually say that now. I say push forward because
you've got to get the nose down.
And a final tip before we go. I guess we need to know what we're going to do once we've taken off.
How are you going to leave the airfield vicinity? That's right. Bearing in mind circuit direction and controlled airspace that may be around or above, and just noise abatement is another thing, especially on departure where we're under lots of power.
For my planning here, it's runway 06 for departure. So we're going to. I'm planning to depart downwind. We've got some noise abatement here, which is turn at the glass house or the mast on the right, and do a slightly 45-degree climb out. Is that right? And we'll climb up to altitude 2,300 feet. Happy with that? First heading's in 215. Let's just pop that in. Anything more from you, or are you happy to go?
No, I'm happy to go. If you are,
let's go. Go, Bravo Mike, India Victor. We're ready for departure.
Golf India Victor, Roger. First wind indicating right and variable.
Lining up, Golf India Victor. Okay, brakes off.
Okay, nobody on the approach, nor on base link.
Roger. Runway's clear, nothing on the climb out. Well, is that a glider? That's glider at Wormingford.
Wormingford, yeah, they're a couple of miles
quite close, isn't it?
Yeah, they're outside the 80, so.
Okay, here we are at the threshold. Airspeed's increasing, temperatures and pressures in the green, no warning lights. And rotating at 61. We're approaching the halfway point now. I'm happy, we've still got good power, and here we go. Brakes and gear up. So, those are the glass houses down there. That'll make us. There's the mast there. Gotcha, I see. So I've turned a little bit earlier than normal. And we can now come back on the power. Golf India Victor is right hand downwind 06, departing on the downwind leg.
Golf India Victor, Roger.
So flaps are up, gear is up. Just going to engage the auto gear extender now. And climb at cruise climb. Golf India Victor's left the ATZ to the southwest, climbing through altitude 2,100 feet, changing to south end 130.780.
Golf India Victor, Roger to south end.
Goodbye.
We'll return to the flight in a moment, but where are we going? Earlier, Nigel set me a challenge.
Nigel has asked me to plan a flight to Elstree, and Nigel, I haven't been to Elstree for a long time, and I have actually been avoiding it because it's a busy spot, really busy spot. Why have you asked me to fly to Elstree?
To give you a little bit of a challenge. Okay.
Yeah.
You're right. It is in a busy spot. It is surrounded by controlled airspace, both laterally and also vertically, because it does sit fairly high up, 330 odd feet. Okay. It's a busy little airfield. It's got some non-standard circuits, and it's got multiple types of traffic with different circuit patterns. So there's a little bit to think about, and actually the more time you spend planning it on the ground, hopefully the easier the flight will be. But we're going to have a chat about those things now.
Okay, so I have had a look at the chart, the Pooley's guide, the AIP information, and I've also looked at the Elstree website, which actually was really useful because there was information on there that wasn't in either of those other things. The circuit, for example, was not depicted anywhere else. I was going to come in from the east. I'm anticipating, I think you'd agree, we're probably on easterly runway today, judging by the weather.
Probably, yeah.
Trying to think about how we're going to join. Now, the AIP has some guidance on that, doesn't it?
Well, the AIP says standard overhead join.
Now, my only thinking with that is, because obviously that's the preferred join, presumably, is that I've done standard overhead joins at busy places before and then got stuck up there because everyone else is not abiding by their standard overhead join and they're all coming downwind and cutting you up more or less. But what would you say about that?
Well, it's horses for courses is my view. So the beauty of a standard overhead join for somewhere that's a little unfamiliar or that you've never been to before is you get the bird's eye view of the airfield. So you can have a look and certainly make sure you're oriented correctly for the correct circuit, because this airfield has got either a left-hand or a right-hand circuit for either runway depending what they choose on the day, and they probably will alternate it for noise abatement.
Right.
Okay, so there's no guarantee which way it's going to be today, left or right. So even though you've planned it there for a left-hand circuit, that might not be the case. They might be on a right-hand circuit.
See, that's what really throws me, because if it were a standard circuit, standard rectangular circuit, that would be fine. But let's have a look at their circuit. Let's bring that up on here. Now, that is not a standard circuit.
Not by any stretch.
No. I mean, this one practically leaves the ATZ or gets very close to it.
Yeah.
And it's terrifying for me.
But bear in mind, that's the circuit pattern. It's not set on rails, and that's often a misconception. We're going to do the best that we can, having not been there before, And that's the beauty of the overhead join in that respect, because you're going to have a look down and you can see from a relatively high altitude, you'll be able to see the lie of the land and, have a little bit more of a view as to where these big places are.
So I'm
going to leave it to you.
You're going to leave it to me? Okay, we'll see what I do. But this is precisely why I've avoided this and other aerodromes like it that have non-standard circuits, because I feel obliged to, try and do it, but you can't spot all these landmarks. You can't remember all these landmarks.
Having studied the aerodrome's preferred circuit pattern, we delve deeper into Elstree's published information. We note hazards, such as public footpaths crossing the threshold of 08 and the midpoint, electricity pylons, tight taxiways and obstructions, helicopter operations, controlled airspace very close above and to the south of the airfield. Also, not obvious until you study the AIP, a considerable downslope on 08 that will make an already short runway for an arrow even harder to land on. Finally, a note to self, we'll be approaching by routing close to Stapleford's ATZ. I'll need to be talking to them or flying above 2,200 feet to be outside of their airspace.
Okay, so I'm feeling a bit more confident about it now. I think we've covered most of the hazards. I think from your observation about the vertical proximity to controlled airspace, we'll stay on QNH. I do tend to do that. I might put the QFE in altimeter 2, which I use as a bit of situational awareness. But shall we go for it?
Go for it.
Okay, let's do it.
We'll return to the cockpit in a moment for our arrival into Elstree.
First, let's hear some more of your confessions.
So I once, having just got my IMC licence, popped out of the cloud at about 1,200 feet, going back to my home airfield, and made all my calls, was really happy where I was, thought it was all perfect, was all in final, down to about 600-700 feet, kept looking at the airfield thinking it doesn't look right, and it turned out I was at completely the wrong airfield, about 3 miles east of where I thought I was, and happily did a go around and landed safely, but that was a bit stupid.
It sounds like you've got 2 airfields quite close together there. And actually, do you know what? That's happened to me a couple of times. I've caught it. One was Blackpool,
right?
And you got Wharton,
yeah,
on the final approach, because I think it's a slightly offset. Might be wrong. Offset approach, and you come out of the clouds and you see Wharton. You think, right, that's the runway. Even though the chart warns you, and I think even the ATC had warned me as well.
Yeah.
It's still just that the power of seeing that runway.
That's it.
You think it's yours
because you want to see a runway and land on it. That's right. Yeah.
My event happened back in 2013. I was doing my qualifying cross-country and I was on the final leg from Sherburn back to Beverley. I'd taken her from Sherburn uneventfully and was on a service from Humberside radar. When I changed back to Beverley radio, my radio failed. I couldn't work out what was going on. I checked the fuses and everything seemed fine. I therefore proceeded to squawk 7600 and landed on the runway which I'd taken off from earlier on that day. It was only when I got back into the clubhouse to tell them about my radio failure that it was pointed out that I'd landed on the wrong runway. The wind had actually changed round during the day. I'd failed to check the windsock. I always do that now. Thanks, John.
I can see how that's happened. You know, qualifying cross country. Yeah. Something going wrong, you're going to be flustered, and
it's the last leg, and it's a familiar airfield. Yeah. So you just revert back to, well, this is where I was this morning. So you assume everything's the same, and obviously it wasn't.
My flying reporter confession is that I once landed in the wrong direction at Shoreham, touching down on runway 20 instead of 02. It was my first flight with passengers after receiving my licence. I was flying with another licence holder.
Yeah, 0220. Alarm bell should ring when you go on a runway with reciprocal headings like that. Yeah, it's easily done, especially if you've got first flight with passengers. Distractions again. Yeah.
Well, recently I had an engine failure because I had forgotten to switch over my fuel tanks. I was en route to Alderney and heard over the radio that the fog had come in and it had made it too low, illegal for me to use my IMC rating for landing. So I chose to divert to the Isle of Wight. I was fully concentrating on rerouting around controlled airspace, military zones, etc., plotting that in. Engine then stops, fortunately over Popham airfield at this point. And once I'd looked down at the switches of the fuel tanks, I could see that I'd not switched over because I was so busy redirecting my routes that I'd forgotten the time element on my fuel tip tank.
Just goes to show, distractions can cause havoc with good normal routines,
and that's going to be a big distraction for them. I mean, that would really throw you, wouldn't it? You've got a lot of work to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks again for your confessions. It's good to share. Nigel and I are now racing towards Elstree, and let's see how my approach to this busy aerodrome goes. As planned, we're flying not above 2,300 feet, leaving us a 200-foot buffer between us and the London Class A TMA above.
So, bearing in mind we're travelling at how quickly? 130 knots, and the ground speed probably of a little bit more than that, I guess.
Yeah.
So think about how you're going to gain a little bit of extra situational awareness before you get there, so you can always listen into the frequency.
Yeah, although we're not far away, I think we probably ought to speak to them, to be honest.
Okay.
We could listen on box 2, but given our distance to them, I think we might change.
Okay.
Copy Victor, request frequency change, Elstree 122.405.
Copy Victor, Roger, full conspicuity, camera radar service terminates, frequency change approved, goodbye.
Good day, Copy Victor.
So just have a listen anyway.
Yeah.
And have a think
I'm
about...
going to slow down a bit, actually.
Well, that was exactly what I was about to say. Think about how quickly we're getting somewhere, and, we don't want to join downwind at 135 knots or whatever. And if you slow up before then, it gives you a little bit more thinking time to take in what they're saying.
No, it wasn't Echo Golf that I saw, so we're halfway down left base now. Roger, Golf Charlie Hotel, report final. Wilco, Charlie Hotel.
So assuming they're on the easterly runway, left base means it's northerly circuit.
Is it possible to give way please to traffic now on left base? He's going to proceed left base to final ahead of you.
That's firm, sir. We'll go dead side and go round.
Roger, thank you.
Elstree information, Golf Bravo Mike, India Victor, 12 miles to the east, request join.
Golf India Victor, Elstree information, good afternoon. I have your details. Runway 08 left-hand circuit, QFE 1002. Currently 2 aircraft in the circuit.
08 left-hand circuit, QFE 1002, Golf India Victor will join overhead.
Golf India Victor, roger.
Okay.
Okay, so it's left-hand circuit, so it is the northerly.
It's the northerly circuit, yeah.
Go at your discretion,
We're going to put QFE in here. We're going to keep the London QNH on the other side.
Sorry about that, Echo Golf.
So, Frida checks fuel is, we'll go to the fullest tank. Got landing sites over there. Mixture rich, radio's tuned, engine temperatures and pressures, direction indicator, and altimeter.
May we do a straighten approach right to now bend.
Golf course is the VRP, which is down there. I see the golf course. Hey. The runway is supposedly just over there, this side of Watford. And we're 7 miles to the threshold. I see the runway.
See the lake.
Yeah, I've got the runway. Oh, the lake is a good
the
mark.
big things that stick out, the lake.
And I can see the runway now.
That's it.
Echo Golf is downwind.
And in the descent on the dead side, we want to keep within the ATZ because there's controlled airspace south of that as well. So.
Charlie Hotel downwind for.
And go around. It will be straight ahead 1 mile, and then it's between these two, and then over that town. That's the downwind leg there, isn't it? Actually,
you got it. Yeah.
Yeah, this is quite good because you've got the time now to look at this circuit.
Exactly.
I can now see, visualise this whole circuit that we were looking at earlier.
So that's the beauty of the overhead join. But as I said, with the constraint of having the awareness of the airspace above us.
The other issue is this runway is quite short and on a downslope. We're going to need to make sure we make a good approach here, and we want a stable approach.
Yeah.
What's your criteria for a stable approach?
So stable approach, basically, to be stable, we need to be configured correctly. In other words, we don't want to be making any further changes to the configuration. In other words, we're going to have the flaps down full, and not suddenly put the flaps down with 100 feet to go. Speed stable on the centre line, and with an appropriate path setting for an appropriate rate of descent.
So you're actually 4 miles out now.
To make sure we have the correct glide path angle.
And by what point did you say we need to reach that criteria?
Ideally 500 feet. So stable at 500 feet. So nothing changing at 500 feet or below.
Right, we're entering the ATZ, so I need to give them a call.
Just wait one, please. Golf Charlie Hotel, you continuing as number 1.
Hey firm, Golf Charlie Hotel, turning final inside the university.
So we're going to go over the 08 threshold here.
Roger, touch and go at your discretion in wind 060 degrees 8 knots.
Touch and go, Golf Charlie Hotel, thanks.
Golf India Victor, enter the ATZ from the north, height 2,000 feet, joining overhead.
Golf India Victor, thank you. Report downwind left hand runway 08.
Report left hand downwind 08, Golf India Victor. Right, we need to work out what...
Apologies for that. Start your discretion.
So what have we got? I don't know, because we've been talking and thinking, I don't know where anything is. I don't know where anything is.
Okay, one on final.
Right.
Another one in the circuit, so nothing on the dead side.
Golf Echo Golf, roger.
So we're approaching the runway threshold.
Yeah.
We're in gear speed, going to get gear down.
Echo Golf over the university.
Golf
come back on the
power. It is.
Roger, we are behind Echo Golf, Golf Rob Charlie.
We've got 3 greens.
Roger, and there's one joining through the overhead to report downwind.
Roger, looking out for traffic, Golf Rob.
So we want to really stay north of this, to be honest.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, within a mile.
Descending dead side.
That's it.
Victor, thank you. Next report downwind.
Okay. I should have seen it, did tell me that.
So we're going to go over the 26 numbers now. We're going to go straight across to the downwind leg.
I'll call you back shortly.
Go.
Gives us a chance to see the other traffic on the climb out on the right hand side of us.
Yeah, I see that.
That's
nothing
fine.
joining downwind that I can see.
Golf land at your discretion, 060 degrees 10 knots.
060
on
10 knots, Echo Golf.
So by going this way, we're going to be out of his way because we'll be downwind before him.
So the middle of that is the downwind, isn't it?
Middle of the field, I say. Middle of the town.
One just climbing out back into the circuit and one joining through the overhead.
Standard circuit, 08, left-hand go, Bravo Charlie.
So if it was
Brakes,
exceptionally busy,
undercarriage, mixture, fuel, landing light, you're strapped in.
Just watch your height.
E's and P's are all good.
So if it was exceptionally busy, I'd call crosswind. But
You would, yeah.
It's not too bad, so we can call downwind when we do the turn.
Okay. Turning now, Golf India Victor, turning downwind, left hand 08.
Golf India Victor, thank you, report final.
Wilco, Golf India Victor. You're strapped in, doors closed.
Good.
Here's the motorway.
That's it, straight ahead.
We go through that hole there, don't we?
Yeah, here's the cemetery. Okay.
Yeah. That's our base turn, isn't it?
Yeah.
Currently 3 in the circuit.
08, left hand 1002, requesting a downwind join if possible.
Golf Fox India, roger at your discretion with due
Just
regard
going to get the speed to decline to flap speed.
Copy, Golf Fox right
Get 1, 2 down.
Golf request taxi to us down, please, sir.
Golf Echo Golf right onto the apron taxi parking.
Echo Golf, thank you.
LC, good afternoon. Helicopter November 766 Alpha Mike inbound. I'd like to join.
Speed's a bit high.
Please. November 76
Reds,
Alpha
blues,
Mike,
3 greys.
information, hello again. Report Alpha inbound. Fixed wing now 08.
So we've got these pylons here.
1002.
They're far enough from there, so you can aim to round out before the numbers.
November 76 Alpha Mike. I'll come in low.
We're a bit high.
Roger.
Correcting nicely. Speed's a bit high.
Charlie Hotel, late downwind, touch and go.
Charlie Hotel, report final.
Wilco, Charlie Hotel.
Golf India Victor, final 08 to land.
Golf India Victor, runway 08, land at your discretion. Instant wind 070 degrees, 8 knots.
Landing Golf India Victor. Speed's still a bit high, but it's going to come down. Happy with that. Just arresting the descent.
Don't take the power off now, go on.
Oh, come on. Alright.
India Victor, welcome to Elstree. If you can get the next right turn, please, vacated Alpha.
Right turn, vacate Alpha, Golf India Victor.
And Golf India Victor, you're parking in front of the tower, just the tower side of the PC-12, please.
Front of the tower side of the PC-12, Golf India Victor. So, there we go. One thing I noticed that I hadn't done as part of my pre-flight prep here is thinking about the exit off the runway and where we're going to park.
Which is what I've
Which
got
is
on my
you've
map.
got that there, but
That's right.
it does help to know what you're going to do after you've landed.
Correct.
I enjoyed that. I didn't think I would. And actually, look how peaceful it is here now. We picked the right moment to come in, I think.
It's good, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good. So just a quick recap then. So on the approach to the airfield, you probably saw the benefits of tuning into the radio frequency nice and early without making any calls. And just by doing that, we picked up what the runway was, what the circuit direction was, even before they'd actually told anybody fully, just because they said someone was on left base and we knew what the wind direction was. So the benefits of an overhead join, you said yourself, I can see everything. I can see where the circuit pattern is. I can look at those towns. I can see the avoid. Slowing up, giving yourself time to think instead of charging into the overhead and into the circuit. And then the rest was easy, apart from one thing.
Oh.
Being prepared for what happens after you've touched down.
Yeah.
So don't forget, on the approach to the airfield, get that chart ready of the ground layout so it's ready and easy to hand instead of having to hunt for it. But no, really well done.
Thank you. Even though I'm now a reasonably experienced private pilot, this brush up on approach and departure procedures with Nigel has been really useful.
There are further resources to help keep your flight safe on the Astral Aviation Consulting website. Click the link on your screen or in the video description. Finally, well done to Peter Hoffman. We've chosen your private pilot confession as the bravest, so you win a Flying Reporter cap and 1 year's free membership to the Flying Reporter Supporters Club. That's all for this episode. Thanks for watching and fly safely, my friends.